Okay, the thing is, it was brought up before about the different cultures and the different languages of the Bible at the time. Now, it's important to note that, when Jesus Christ was crucified and on the cross, that Pilate had a sign put up above his head, okay? And he put it up in three different languages. One was Hebrew, the second was in Greek, and the third was in Latin, okay? So all three of these different languages were dominant at the time of Jesus. So he would have been familiar with all three of these cultures to some degree. Now, the thing is, it fascinates me. I'm hearing this word come up, soul, a lot. Soul is actually a Latin word. It's not a Greek word, but a Latin word. And the Greek translation most of the time is psyche, okay, which we turn into mind. As a matter of fact, a lot of our words, psychologists and this and that and everything, come from that Greek word. The whole psychologist, the whole thing comes from Greek. But anyway, the thing is, these different cultures make a big difference as to how we actually read and see what we're reading. And it has a big, big influence because we've taken these words and made English words out of them. And sometimes they maintain the original definition, and sometimes they take and are totally, totally different. So when we see the word, we see something different than what was actually intended to be presented to begin with.
Thank you, David. Thank you. Next up is going to be Brian, followed by Jacob. Brian.
Yes, I'd just like to follow up on what I was talking about earlier. I'm kind of interested in the role of sacrifice, especially out of this temple incident. He didn't object to people contributing money to the temple, but then it's, as came out in this in the text that was just read from Corinthians, Jesus becomes the sacrifice. And then sacrifice, I think, if we take that on board, sacrifice becomes less important, at least doesn't have the same significance that it used to have in the Old Testament. And you shift away from the ritual of sacrifice towards a ritual of remembering the sacrifice that Jesus made. And then also, I believe that a stress away from the act or the ritual of sacrifice towards just a pure, more of a belief, and then the ethical point that was made earlier. That's all I wanted to add.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Brian. Next up is Jacob, followed by Joe. Jacob.
Yeah, just to address something David said, and I assure you, David, this is no hammering on you at all. It's just the idea, because the idea you present, it's not an unpopular one, that there's so much lost in translation and that there's trouble of words, and we're sort of doomed to like never being able to reel it in and figure it out. A couple of things. First of all, like with that attitude, it's like, why try then? It's like we're in such a morass, such a mess with this. There's always going to be the problem that this might not be the meaning of, and I think that's basically at the heart of postmodernism. That idea comes out of, that's a core tenet of postmodernism, is that you can translate texts in infinite number of ways, and so no narrative has any supremacy over any other one. They're all relative, and so truth is relative. It's that whole idea, and it's like that just freezes us. If it's all just that, then why do anything? More importantly, though, is that if you believe in the power of the word, in the beginning was the word. Everything started, well, the word preceded everything and then generated everything. So the idea of Christ as the word, it's like you have to believe in the power of the word to believe in the power of the Christ. And if you believe in the power of the word, then the truth can traverse language. And if you start with the premise that, well, God wrote the book, well, he has no problem with dealing with the trouble of translation. Like, it's not a problem, right? He can make the meaning survive the translation. He could, let's use Christian language. He can bless the efforts of those who are sincerely trying to do it properly. And there are a lot of human beings that have dedicated their lives to translating that thing properly, and they've poured their souls into it. The Byington translation, this man spent 40 years on a train to and from work translating. He spent his train rides to and from work translating. This man cared about it, and he worked hard, and he studied the languages. And to say that, well, we can't get the meaning from his work, it's just like, it kills all human endeavor. It's like a dangerous idea. It's a bad idea, especially if anyone claims to be Christian, to just say the word is inadequate and misleads us whenever we try to work with it. It's in some sense a denial of the Christ, you could say. I'm not saying, David, you're denying Christ, just to be sure, but the idea is a dangerous one, and that's why I'm lashing out on it. I think it's just devastating.
Thank you, Jacob. And folks, please feel free to express yourself as clearly as you can, because it's important to get things right. And it's important to actually have a conversation at this level. So thank you, Jacob, and thank you, David. Next up is going to be Joe, followed by David. Joe.
I just wanted to make a quick point about Jesus's wrath in the temple. Is the one thing that by expressing his wrath, he's also incurring the wrath of the hierarchy. And so that allows him to eventually fulfill the prophecy. So, and he's speaking truth, right? And he's speaking about the idea of you making God's house a marketplace. And yours now I can fulfill, that then the leadership or the Jewish leaders at that particular moment in time were then angered by this, essentially his reaction, and he started to garner the attention of people. So this allows him eventually to fulfill, it leads to his own crucifixion, his, exposing himself like this. So it's just in a practical sense. Just thought I would put that out there.
Wonderful. Thank you, Joe. Next up is David, followed by Mike. David.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, I'm not trying to take and push my beliefs or anything on anybody else. To me, the thing is, Jesus Christ is all about testimony. And the thing is, the way that each person sees Jesus Christ and his words, and they speak out, that's their testimony of his words. The thing is, when I talk about the things that I am talking about, really, I'm sort of following his commandment that says, number one, seek, and then ask, and then knock, and that there is a primary fundamental commandment that Jesus gives to all of us. And naturally, we're all going to go down a different path because we have different environments. And something like a platform like this is, to me, a very wonderful thing in which all people can come together and make their speech, and we all can learn from one another and not accept necessarily the doctrine of one another, but take and use it to sort of like a cow chews their cud and think about it and meditate on it and see where it fits in our lives. If it does, and a lot of times the stuff we learn will not fit in our lives. And that's why Jesus speaks in parables. So we all can gather something different from whatever he says. And I just love it. That to me is
wonderful. Thank you, David and Jacob. I see, this is what this format is about, where everybody can fully express, see, this is all knowledge is individual, the quest is individual. It's like you are trying to pursue the truth, and that is sacred. So each of our own understanding of whatever of the world, of our own lives is sacred, and that is most important thing. So never, it's not, only on the secondary it is social, and the social part is also important because it allows us to actually see another spirit operating, in their authentic way. And there is so much to be learned from each other, but it doesn't change the fact that the primary relationship is between you and God. And that is true for each and every one of us. And this entire discussion, our entire meetups, are based on the idea of what I call joint exploration, that each of us is doing this. We see that each of us is doing it, and we are seeing that we are trying to do the same thing. So we are being honest and direct with each other. And there are going to be disagreements about all kinds of things. And there is nothing wrong with that. Each of us has to follow our own path. So I really, encourage you to pursue that, to speak very openly whenever you have any disagreements, and do so courteously. That's the courteousness is also respecting the authenticness, identity of the other people, and not confusing the ideas of the other people with the core of the individual being of the other person, which is sacred. So thank you very much, folks. Next up is going to be Mike, Dave, and Ambika. Mike, you got 2 minutes. And please try to keep it on the topic, please.
On the topics that someone else brought up, I won't even need 2 minutes. We talked about language, that they didn't speak English and they didn't know about NIV versus King James. The authoritative manuscripts are in Greek, even though that wasn't their native language either. Now, Greek, we learned from Brian McVeigh that they didn't use a written language that was read silently. There's punctuation and cantillation and trope in terms of kind of a musical scale on these, where there's a precision way to chant each of these things. And the meaning changed as to how they were chanted. Now, when they translated to English, all that stuff was lost. When it was translated to Spanish or even Latin, all that stuff was lost. And so as to subject, predicate, pronouns, articles, and further, there wasn't any spacing in Greek between the words. They were all run together. So unless you chanted it, then you had some recognition of the music that was in there, you got an entirely different meaning out of some of these things. You wouldn't want me to try and imitate a Greek chanter, but believe me, it's complicated. I think Jeff, who's also been silent through most of this, has some background in cantillation. Thank you.
Thank you.
1 minute, 15 seconds.
Impressive, very impressive. I think if I give you 1 minute, you will see, Mike, I love your erudition. I love the range of things that you bring. All you have to do is to kind of keep it on topic, and I think giving a time limit is the best way.
Wasn't this on topic?
It was very much on topic. It was very much on topic. I'm making this general point for the future. Thank you, sir. Next up is going to be Dave, Ambika, and Jacob. Dave.
Right. So during the wrap-up period here, I just wanted to say thank you for having the meetup. And the question I have, trying to walk in the steps of Jesus, trying to study his word so that we can attempt to make decisions as he would make them, live as he would want us to live, know his will. That's just a continual study, right? Trying to do that every day. And the environment certainly is not conducive to making it easy on us and trying to do that. So I just wanted to thank you. And obviously the question of anger and how to display it, when is it appropriate and not, it draws a lot of contention, a lot of questions around when is it appropriate. So tonight it really helped me know that this certainly is a complex issue. So it's not just me and my ineptitude when I'm reading the scripture, but it's actually a quite complex topic. So thank you.
Thank you, Dave. And welcome to our meetups. Next up is going to be Ambika, followed by Jacob. We are in no hurry to wrap up. So we are going to just continue this until we kind of figure, we look at these things. So please take your time. Go ahead, Ambika.
I wanted to say I have not read it recently, so I don't know a lot anymore, but I like the context you provided, Srikant, that it is an individual journey on some level, even though there are so many interpretations. And I wanted to, Jacob brought up the idea of the soul of the country, and it's true, but it also reflects individual souls that are suffering. And it makes me wonder then, where do we individually make the choices to take different actions to weave a healthy America, healthy United States, a healthy world, so we don't fall into the web of deception. And I think it's really important that you're doing this, because I want to know more too. And this is amazing. And may I just because it's today's Diwali, wish you all a happy Diwali.
Thank you. Folks, it is Diwali in India, which is a festival of light. And so thank you very much, Ambika. Next up is Jacob.
I feel stupid asking this. That Festival of Light, that's not where all the colors of chalk. No, that's something else. All the chalky colors.
No. But the thing is that everything in India is colorful. Okay, so it's
Right,
just different. Yeah.
And you see,
yeah. Go ahead, Jacob.
So typical ignorant American, don't know anything about the rest of the world. On this topic of translation, I think just about 20 minutes ago we had a young man who, it was rice, not chalk, rice, thank you. More ignorance. A young man came in and asked the question, because of translation, does that create problems? He's not alone in that. So many people I talk to, the problem of lost in translation prevents them from the text. It keeps them from the text because it's such a daunting problem. It's like, well, I'm going to invest myself into this book that's impossible to read to begin with, and is going to require like decades to understand. And it's, it's such an undertaking. But then to go into that with this prevailing idea that there's this problem that you might not even be reading what was written. And it's like, well, who would ever want to do that? Like, I wouldn't want to. A way to think about it is that it's not even a problem. It's like, don't even worry about what's not there. Just worry about what's there, because the text itself, let's say half of it's missing. Like, I forget the gentleman's name, but said the incantation part, or the audible part is lost, the chanting and so forth. And there's a meaning in that current, and that's all lost. Well, let's say it is. Well, you still got a bunch of text here that's really, really hard to understand. So you could still just go in and forget all the stuff that's lost. And at least that's like a little more promising, right?
Yep.
Agreed.
So I have a lot to say about this, because this is, again, this is an idea that we have looked at quite a bit during these meetups. So firstly, I would say Bible is particularly easy to understand because it is doing it in 4 different ways. You can look at it literally, you can look at the stories and the meaning of stories, you can look at the morals in it, and you can look at it, what is it pointing to? So this kind of 4-fold way of looking at it. The translation problem is mostly about the literal issue. The stories are not affected too much by that. The morals are clear enough in most languages. So that's one point, that this way of using this multi-pronged way, the exegesis, is a great way of approaching it. You're not just saying, what does this sentence mean? And you're trying to dig into the meaning of each of the words. So that's one thing. The second point I wanted to make is that we're doing these meetups on Tao Te Ching. Tao Te Ching is written in Chinese in 500 BC, in a culture that we don't know, where there is no continuity of the context. You have all the context of the Bible that is permeating throughout this society. So that is actually a far more important thing than the language, because you have this meaning, it's being carried in the persons of everybody around you, many people around you. in Tao Te Ching, the way we are approaching it is that everybody is using multiple translations, and they are using translations that speak to them. One of the key points of Tao Te Ching, I'm not doing the right intonations here, but one of the key points is that you're trying to understand the Tao. Words are a way of understanding the Tao. Words are just the means of getting at what is. What you're really focused on is what is. Don't be focused on words alone. Words are simply pointing to the truth. And so it is your commitment to getting at the truth. What matters. And you have to go through whatever words you want, and you can use multiple translations, multiple things in order to get that. So your connection with the Tao, with the nature, with God is what really matters. The next point I want to make is about writing and speaking, and writing versus conversation. This is a point that Walter Ong makes. And in this sense, we are actually going back to the original way in which writing was being used, where we are not just taking the word, right? See, after the books, after printing, people just take the book and try to read it. The person is not there. The author is not there. The words are there, but the author is not there. And the old way in which, the original way in which the writing was used is that it was always done in conjunction with conversation. So whether it was the peripatetic school of Aristotle, where the students are going around reading text, talking about it, disagreeing on it, and then writing it up again and using that as a base. For the same tradition was done in the Gurukuls of India. The same thing was done in the monasteries in the Middle Ages, where there is a speaking out of the text. There is levels, and this is what, that is there in the Torah. You have these multiple commentaries of different people, and people go back and forth between people on those commentaries. And what that does is that it captures the entire richness. In that sense, the oral language in a conversational format is far richer than just writing. Writing is a digitized version of the oral conversation. It captures some things, but not everything. You have to bring it back. Jesus did not write anything. He just spoke, because through the speaking, his character shone through, which was far more important. Somebody asked the question, how did people believe that he was the Messiah before he had done any miracles? You can actually see people. All of that is carried in the oral, and you have all of this, all of these abilities in order to get at the meaning of things. So I fundamentally agree with Jacob that don't be fazed by translation. You have all these tools, and you have to use all these tools and work with everybody using, many people using all these tools in order to get at the meaning of things. All right, next up is going to be Evanik, followed by Jacob. Evanik.
Yeah, first of all, what you said was just beautiful, Shrikant, so thank you. I think one of the things is the reason why people get caught up in translations and things of that nature is because the Bible has been used by world leaders to control and to have power, to gain power, and to keep power. And if you can rule under, if you can show scripture, it's kind of like you have you have an edict from God, or you're blessed by God, or something of that nature, and churches have used it. So I think your point about using about having it be literature, understanding that it's literature, stories, morals, and what is it pointing to? I think when you study the Bible for yourself, you get all that, so right now I'm unchurched. And so for me, studying the Bible is a personal journey now. I think if you take it as a personal journey, which is what it's meant to be, and what Jesus gets to in all of the New Testament, is about what inside that counts. It's about what you're looking for that counts. And it's about who you are on the inside that counts. But it's really, it sounds cliche, but it's not, because out of your heart is how you enjoy life. It's from what is inside of you that allows you to really understand life for yourself and to understand your purpose. If you're looking for that, that's how you find fulfillment. If you're looking outside of yourself for any of these things, then if you're looking outside of yourself for fulfillment or love or anything else, that's where you get lost. And I think Jesus is pointing that out to us. And I think if people study that, just like you said in what you said earlier, just now, actually, what you just said, if people are looking to it and really studying with other people for the purpose of really finding out the truth, that's the whole point. And I think that's the whole point of Jesus's life, is finding the truth and finding out what is true for you from the inside of you, and not letting other people, not saying, I want to say not letting other people influence, but like knowing who you are truly, and allowing other people, getting thoughts from other people, but not allowing them to influence you. And I don't think I said that right, but somebody please say that better than I can, because I can't think of any better words.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Evanik. Next up is Jacob, followed by Brian. Jacob.
So just to clarify, I don't exactly think, when I say that don't worry about translation, it's not because I think that the words are merely vehicles and that there's something behind the words that's the essential meaning, and that the words in some sense are, just some kind of shell or initial contact with the idea or something. Because I don't think that I actually think it's the words. So, and this is an interesting point, because this is exactly where the Bible and the Tao Te Ching go in deep conflict.
Yes.
Chapter 1, verse 1, the spoken Tao, it's not the yes. Eternal Tao, right? So those two ideas can't exist, because that's saying that the words are merely pointing, and the Bible does the idea of the word in the Bible, that the word itself is creative. The word itself is creative, and so for the word itself to be creative, it has to be a true word, and that truthful words are creative in themselves. And the Tao Te Ching is sort of saying the opposite, right? And then you might look at, well, the Bible, the reason here we are on the edge of all time, because we're in the present, which is the deepest part of the future man has ever known, right? That's implied. Here we are. And here's this book still with us. So this book has lasted, as we know, it is just the words, because the book, you open it up, there's not people there. I mean, there are people, there's stories of people, but there's words there, and the words themselves have been able to contain the stories. They're sufficient to contain the story. So there's an idea of adequacy. The word is adequate to present truth. And the idea in the Tao Te Ching is that it's inadequate to present truth. What I see happening, or to present absolute ultimate truth. What I see happening, though, is that those ideas try to get merged all the time. It's like we might be reading the Bible and someone might be saying, well, these words are just pointing. I don't know if you said that, Shrikant, I don't know if you're saying the Bible's words are just pointing, but then we're marrying the two ideas now. We're marrying the idea of the Bible with the Tao Te Ching, and I don't think that ever works out well. I think we just get confused when that happens. And I do it all the time. We all do it all the time. We don't have all this stuff straight, but sometimes when we overlap them and we conflate them, that's where things get, difficult to grasp. So.
Yeah, no, that's excellent point. This is a very, very profound point. This is really, the kinds of things that are at the cutting edge of what the world is trying to figure out right now. Because this is like East and West. This is saying, East has a certain way of doing that, of looking at philosophy, looking at the world. It is very intuitive. It is trying to grasp the whole thing. It is very, very skeptical about words, anything definite. It is trying to say, if I try to do something definite, I will lose my intuition. But at the same time, it is very deeply intuitive. It is trying to get at, it is getting at some things. So there is that. West, on the other hand, and you're absolutely right. It's those two sentences, Tao Te Ching starts by saying anything that can be named is not the real thing. Whereas in the beginning was the word. That's exactly opposite. Okay. So what resolves it? Or what is it? What does the combination look like? So another way of putting it is my friend Yasuhiko, who is a Japanese philosopher, put it very beautifully. He says, the way in which West proceeds, anyway, let's not go into, let me put it in my own words. Okay. So it's a question of what words are. And I think the clue to that is Jesus, of being God and man. So the words, in some aspects, I mean, again, again, this is just very new to me. But what I'm saying is that this is the core issue between East and the West, as best as I understand it. West, because now step back from the Bible, look at the West as a whole. Look at Aristotle, look at science, look at mathematics, look at technology. This is all Western things. They are all about precisely naming things. It is all about naming. It is all about very sophisticated ways of checking your naming. That's what science is. You've said this, what is the basis for it? You've said this, how do I test this? How do I modify it? So working on words as an instrument, working on things, again, Tao Te Ching not only talks ill of the word, but it also talks about the 10,000 things that the words produce. And West is about transformation of the world. It is about making things. So it's a very fundamentally different approach to it. But I think there is an integration to it. There is things that West can learn from the East. So for example, Jacob, you were complaining about the spirit was lost. East does not lose spirit. It always never loses spirit. That is a core part because the spirit is alive. It will lose words. It will not lose spirit. Okay. It will lose words. It will lose things. It can get very, very bad in terms of the actual life, whether it is caste systems, Chinese top-down hierarchies. It can mess things up really badly. Okay, West is much better at that. It has much more kind of checks and balances, all kinds of ideas to take care of it. But so what I'm saying is that each of these have to learn from each other. And folks, we are looking at Tao Te Ching and China and Chinese ideas, these ideas in detail and what that has to offer you. And when I say that it is individual quest, you have to decide. You have to look at Tao Te Ching and say, what is it? What is it saying and how much of it? What do I get from it? Interface with it. Don't take it. Similarly, you're looking at Bible. I'm soon starting Bhagavad Gita on Fridays, not tomorrow, but the Friday after that, I'm going to start Bhagavad Gita. And we'll look at all of these things in parallel. It's an individual quest. It's not about, I'm going on too long, but this is really the heart of the problem that is being worked out. These three sets of ideas have developed separately on separate islands, because those Himalayan mountains and Tibetan plateaus are kind of, are not very easily crossable. So these, China, India, and the West have developed separately. What is happening now is that it's possible to see the commonalities and differences and try to put it together, because I think each of them have things to offer the other. West is good at words and at transforming things. That's a genuine thing that West has brought to the world. China knows about balance, about health, and how you need to be sensitive to these balances and work with them. That's how the Chinese mind. That's a very deep idea, and that India is focused on consciousness and how consciousness operates for thousands of years. It has things to teach. Meditation is just one of them. There is a lot there. And you have to say yes to all of them and try to integrate it in your own way, in your own life. That is the upside that I see here. So thank you very much for bringing this point. So next up is going to be Brian, Evanique, Jacob, and David. Brian.
Well, first of all, I don't know if I have much to add to all that. I think that was beautiful and brilliant. Everything that Jacob has said and that you've said, others on this topic. I'll just, it strikes me that all these issues on translation concerning that have been highlighted on translation arise even in the absence of translation. There's disagreement about what words say or whether there should be an authoritative meaning, even if there's no translation involved. And I think that was true before we used the word and we were using, and the Greeks or whoever wrote these texts was using the word logos. Probably no agreement at what logos meant. The other thing I'll say, I was once, my wife and I were invited by some good friends in Brooklyn, New York, to go with them to the Catholic Church and listen to the beautiful singing, and it really, really was amazing. And then the priest gave a talk, his homily, his speech, and at the end, he said, you know, we all worship the same God, but we all have our own understanding of the God. There are probably as many gods in this room. He said, this is the Catholic priest talking. He says, there are as many gods in this room as there are people. And you're all welcome to bring your own understanding of the God, of your God, to the communion table and partake in the communion. That, as far as I understand it, is a very un-Catholic approach, because the Catholic Church likes to say, we know who is God and we're going to tell you who God is. But this is a very different approach, and recognition by this priest, who is also a monk. This church is operated out of a monastery, that there is inevitably different understandings, but there all can be authentic, sincere beliefs. Now, even though we all have, the last thing I'd say is, even though we all have individual, and there's maybe necessarily, let's say it's almost necessarily never entirely the same, there can be agreement, even though it's not provided by an authority, there can be agreement on what a lot of these words mean. And exploring the agreement is, I think, is for me, one of the real benefits of these meetups. The other one, I guess the last point is, just as Shrikant said, it's also looking at, and others have said as well, I'm always delighted and enlightened to hear other people's insights. It complements and completes my own. In addition to example, I mean, we could pick around on like what the word means, but hey, when you start reading Tao Te Ching and you see they have a very different approach to words, that helps to bring into focus the role and concept of words in the Christian texts. So to get an understanding of even what you think the words might mean, listen to what other people say and read other different contexts in which the word is used.
Wonderful, Brian. I wanted to tell you that, like, I was looking at the history of the Catholic Church and looking at all the thoughts that have been prevalent and part of the church across time. You look at Augustine and you look at Aquinas, and there is a tremendous range. It is not one interpretation. So there is as large a variation within the Catholic Church as is there within philosophies. There is Platonic approach to it, there is Aristotelian approach to it. So it is enormously rich work that we are talking about. And all of these people have coexisted. They have had conversations. Some of them have been part of the hierarchy. Some of them have been heretics at a time. Then they have become part of the hierarchy. So there is this entire history. A friend of mine was saying, oh, if you're doing John, you should definitely incorporate Thomas Aquinas' comments. I just looked it up. I think it is 5,000 pages on Gospel of John, somewhere between 1,500 to 5,000 pages of commentary of Thomas Aquinas on the Gospel of John. So this is enormously rich work. Okay, so thank you, Brian. Really appreciate that. Next up is Evanique, Jacob, and David. Evanique.
Yeah, I actually have a different viewpoint on the Tao Te Ching and the Bible. I think they are two sides of the same coin. And in the Tao Te Ching, the Christian translation of it is, the God who can be described is not the true God. The name that can be spoken is not the name of God. And I think in John, I think God is indescribable. I think the Tao gets it right. And I think in the Bible, the God is, in a sense, indescribable. What he creates, what he uses is words to create the earth and to create the trees. And so I think I don't see it as competing or opposite. I think I see it, like you said, Shrikant, as an integration. And in the second verse, it says, God is unnameable. Naming God is the beginning of religion. I think if you are looking for God and trying to describe God, I think, it does. It kind of goes to what he's saying. It's like, it does create religion. It creates like an organized thing. And we as human beings are trying to understand God in our own mind, which is almost impossible. So that's what I see, basically, what they're saying in Tao Te Ching. And I think the God of the Bible saying the same thing. It's like, we're trying to use human words to describe God, and there's no way to do that. So I see it as similar. But what I also see is that, like the whole Jordan Peterson series where he talks about order and chaos. And I see God as bringing order to chaos and using words to do that. But I think when we get into having human beings trying to take on an understanding of God and saying that they understand God, I think that's where we get in trouble. And I think that's where things get misinterpreted. So I just see it as an integration, much more so as like one opposite the other. I think they kind of describe the same thing, but in different ways.
Thank you, Evanique. Next up is going to be Jacob, David, and Katie. Jacob.
So Shrikant, if we can become very good friends, then we will have saved the world, right? merge these two things.
Let's do that.
So I love this. This is like actually a conversation I've been wanting to have that I haven't been able to have properly. So I'm really excited. Forgive me. I think part of the solution is to talk about how, well, what all the East can sort of do is observe the West, right? And if the West is kind of messing up how they're representing the word, then we have a problem on both sides. I think there's a misapprehension of what the word is, because the East says, well, the word is concrete. You're naming something and you're labeling it and it's done. It's like, that's not exactly the idea as painted in the scriptures. Because there's this idea of a splitting constantly happening. And you see that in the natural world. You have cells that divide, and you have, well, two people come together and they have relations and a new form is born. I experienced that with the word. So most practically speaking, I might read a verse and I might read this verse several times, and these sets of words have meanings to me. However, I might be reading somewhere else in the scriptures, and I'll think of this other verse somewhere else. I'll go back to it. And now that this idea here has touched this other idea that I was reading, when they come together, a new idea emerges. And so there isn't this thing where it's set. Now it's set temporarily, you might say. Like you might say, well, like this is what that means. But it's a constant building to expand the picture. So it's not as concrete. I think what's happened in the West is it's been made concrete. It's stultified, right? And that's well, enough said there. Yeah, that there hasn't been a proper understanding of the splitting. The idea of a splitting is huge in the Bible. The Red Sea was split. It's all over the place, the splitting. And there's something, even in the Mosaic law, it was unclean for the Jews to eat animals that split the hoof. So there's this idea in the Bible, there's something sacred about the act of splitting. And that sounds really weird, but trust me, there's something going on with this. And then you might think of the picture that Jordan Peterson posted one time of it wasn't his picture, but of how the Bible is the first hyperlinked text. Have you seen that image? So there's this linkage in the scriptures, and so there's an infinite configuration of linkages. There's just so much going on there that then you can imagine that that's a fertile ground, not to concretize everything and name everything and then have it all named, but for an infinite combination and emergence, which is very much alive. And that would like make the East really happy, right? Because you could put spirit in that and it would have everywhere to go. I don't know if you follow that, because I'm on the edge of my thinking here too, but I think that might be part of what merges the East and the West, is to understand how the word isn't actually concrete as it might seem.
No, it's I think this is great. I don't know how to respond to it well, but I'll try. So I mean, one of the most inspiring things I got from reading the first paragraph of Gospel of John is the concept of word. And the biggest thing I got is that I think this idea of Jesus as being 100% God and 100% man is a very deep idea, very deep idea. And the word is Jesus. So word is 100% God and 100% man. So it is something that is actually, when it is done right, it captures something eternal. At the same time, it is something that refers to real. So it is doing that in this dynamic way at the same time. So it is concrete at the same time, and it is abstract at the same time. Something, it is capturing something eternal that is always there. And it is this infinitely malleable thing that can handle chaos at the same time. Something like that. I mean, that is what it is trying to do. This is like, in the science version of it, it's what people call, induction of, you're trying to kind of hold all of these data with this one core law. So the law is eternal. At the same time, it is operative of all these things. So that it is living, in the sense that it is actually that process of that is going back and forth between the actual facts and how you come up with this. So it is like the spirit that is moving you from real to the eternal and back, and the eternal transforming the real. I mean, that entire cycle is being just captured in that idea. And it is not just induction, but it is also transformation. So it captures the entire idea of the West, of the concepts as being derived through a process from the concretes and used to transform the concretes. Both are One is science, the other is technology, which is really the gift of West to the world. So go ahead, Jacob, did you want to comment? Okay. Next up is David, followed by Katie. David.
Yeah, I'm hearing all this stuff and everything, and it makes you think a little bit, but I sort of have things set down in a value structure myself. And the way I look at the word, the first part of John clearly says everything about the word. But then I also connect it to the Old Testament and Genesis, where God gives instructions almost immediately and starting in Genesis to take and name everything according to its kind. So everything has a name, and it describes the event, the kind of event that actually exists. So to me, when I'm thinking about words, the thing is, I look at it describing an event. As a matter of fact, sometimes now when I take and see a word, many times you take a word and it has many little words inside of it, prefixes, main word, and a suffix. It may have several of them. So if I can get the center word, okay, I automatically know what the rest means. And so often it doesn't mean exactly what people are using it for. But the thing is, what would be really interesting for me to understand, and I've had a problem with this Tao Te or whatever it is stuff, because to me, I find it sort of like revelations somewhere off in somebody's mind somewhere. But it would be interesting to see how, if you take an event, any event, as to how, okay, the West looks at it, also the Eastern religion, and also your Indian religion. How do they take and look at one event and define it? Because it would seem to me there has to be, otherwise you don't have a form of communication. The thing is, there may be the supernatural maybe involved in it to some degree. To me, the supernatural is very much involved in Christianity. I mean, the thing is, but I'm hearing that it also in these other religions as well. And to me, it would be interesting to see, like I say, if you take an event and look at it in these three different ways that people are. Because even Western theology, or whatever you want to call it, Christianity, one thing that I noticed has happened an awful lot is Greeks had their own theology, okay, which is the temple of Apollo and everything that went on there. And the thing is, Homer and his writings, the Odyssey and the Iliad, I mean, that all represents Greek theology in its own right. And the thing is, their form of teaching was always through stories. So you go back into the Hebrew part of it. What is that? It's a story about Abraham, Isaac, about Jacob, and the whole family. And the thing is, within all these stories, it tells events of life that have happened to these people that many people can sometimes associate within their own life, okay, to see what's happened. And the same is true with the New Testament, with Jesus Christ. And the thing is, he openly says he speaks parables, which is stories. I mean, stories are something that everybody can see and appreciate in their own way and gather something out of it. That's why, like what Jacob said, I really agree with what he said, is that, no matter what version you're looking at, it still talks to the person through the stories. The only thing is, myself, I've always been on this, it's been in my mind to take and search exactly what some of these meanings were. Like I went back, and when I first started in the Bible, taking and breaking the covenant down and saying, what does this mean in Hebrew? And I would take in those words and break them down as to what they actually meant in the Hebrew language. Now, that was just something for me. But the thing is, inside of that, there's a story. And the story, all these stories, whether they be in Greek or Hebrew, and I think probably in these other languages, relate to human life and some kind of event that has happened within inside of whoever's talking about it, and whatever's there.
Yeah, no, that's excellent point. I want to make 2 points. I mean, one is that, we have all different faculties, and we have different strengths and different ways in which we approach and grasp things. This is very clear when you look at something like, for example, we are studying this book called Design Way. And it is really amazing to see the approaches people are taking to it. There are some people who are very analytical. They want to get the meaning of everything. There are some people who are very intuitive, so they can take these diagrams and organize them just without words, visually they can organize them. There are people who like to work with their hands. So the way they actually master something is by working. There are people who have very advanced feelings about what things are proper or not proper. And they have got this very delicate way of saying, okay, this is off and this is not off. So all of us approach things differently. And one of the advantages of a forum like this is that you can see other people approach things differently and maybe learn something from them. And what happens is that of course, you will continue to exercise the strengths that you have, but adding even 5% or 10% of something else to your toolkit makes, the throughput, what you're able to do, far more richer. Thank you. Next up is going to be Katie, followed by Jacob. Katie.
Yeah, I agreed with Evanique. I often use the concept of the Tao to kind of understand what a creator is. To understand like the concept of a creator, like it's something that you can't 100% know what it would be like. And I see the idea of word more as establishing like correct belief, like this is like the word of God, and rather than like this explains everything. So that's how I.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Katie. Next up is Jacob.
Yeah, this gets so deep so quickly, doesn't it? So I think a distinction is necessary. And incidentally, what is the distinction but a splitting? Because oftentimes we have one idea but we could split that, and there's actually two ideas there that have to be distinguished. And so when we're talking about perspectives, for example, I see this happening all over the place. And I love the idea of course, like we want everyone's perspective. We need everyone's perspective. But we want those perspectives to be somewhat complementary, not conflicting. Because like in the case of the idea of the first verse in the Tao Te Ching and the idea of the word in the Bible, well, can we just say, well, those are just two different perspectives, equally valid, and then we just go on with our day? Well, to me, that's a problem. Like those either need to be reconciled or one of them has to go. And that's very different than to say that, well, there's different perspectives that can complement one another and that can coexist. But that distinction isn't talked about. Just like, hey, respect everyone's perspective. And that's not enough, right? If they're conflicting, you have to deal with it. You have to deal with it. Unless you live in a world where you think every single perspective and every single thing that's said is equally true. And that's part of the thing Jordan Peterson's railing against, is this equity, and all ideas are all equally valid and things like that. Those ideas destroy the world. So some things are better than others. And if you have a conflict, that's an opportunity to find out which one's better. On that note, last comment, I feel like I've been just like talking your ears off tonight. I appreciate everyone's ears, really. So I'm going to take my hammer to the best hammer throw I can throw at the Tao Te Ching. And I do it, just let's see if it stands. It's really simple. And sometimes this feels almost like a cheap shot, but I've carefully thought it through, and I don't think it's a cheap shot.
Go right ahead.
So the Tao Te Ching, I have tons of ignorance surrounding the Tao Te Ching too, so I might say stupid things and you can fill me in. But it uses words. And if it didn't have words, it wouldn't be communicated, and we wouldn't even be talking about it. Like, we're talking about the Tao using words. So the Tao itself relies upon the word for its propagation. And so in some sense, the word is sire to the Tao. And so that's why I found it like profoundly hypocritical of the Tao, if I could call the Tao hypocritical. And again, I want to be wrong in some sense. It poo-poos the word in a sense, and saying that it's somewhat inadequate, like it's useful, but it's inadequate. But then it's using the word to convey that idea. And so I could apply its logic to itself and say, well, how can I trust that verse? Do you know what I'm saying? And I know that's where it feels like a cheap shot a bit, but it also feels valid. Like if you're going to say the word is secondary or second rate in some sense, or inadequate, well, then Why do you rely on it utterly? That's my hammer, Shrikant.
All right, wonderful. Thank you. Now that you have thrown your hammer, let me go ahead and let me give you a short answer to that. It's the difference between the way in which alphabet works and the way in which logograms or pictograms work. What they're doing is that the words there you're talking about are not the words in the alphabet. Words are like little pictures that are capturing things, which actually suggest things. Those are actually metaphorical. They are saying, this is a flowing water. It is, life moves like this. So it is suggestive, metaphorical way of not saying this like this, but it is pointing like that towards that and inviting you to explore relations in nature. So it is really another way of putting it is that Tao is mostly about nature and respecting the nature of nature. That's all it is trying to do. And it is trying to say that if you have culture that conflicts with nature, then go with nature. Go with how people actually are, how relationships between people actually are, instead of using some things that you have created, that you've fallen in love with. So it is really trying to promote nature. The West is more focused on culture, of saying, how do you make things right? And so it is coming, but we live in nature by making culture. So both those things are needed. The Tao Te Ching has the nature part much better than the West. It has the spirit much better than the West. But the West has the culture and and the words far, far better. So I think there is relative strengths in each of them and relative weaknesses, but they are not, I don't see them as conflicts. It's when two things are said, it's possible that both are capturing different aspects of reality. And if that is so, then it is not that you either take this or that, but you find what is actually true, which might be a combination of those things. So that's my response to the hammer. It's not not a full response, but let me go ahead and go with Jing, Evanique, and Mike. Jing.
Yeah, I think what I can't remember his name. He's talking about it's quite interesting. I think that was exactly what I was believing before. So I think the Western thinking, we believe there's ultimate truth. Basically, there's something that's true, then the other things are not true. So we are pursuing this ultimate truth. But I see when I study Tao Te Ching and Eastern, even I grew up in China, I actually have more Western thinking somehow. And I realized they don't believe that. So they believe, the paradox coexist, so the good and bad. So not good is good, bad is bad, but the good and bad, there exist for balance. So there's this more like uncleared, instead of Western like good or bad, truth or not true. So they're like they all can combine together. It's more like a vague, organic way of thinking, which I start more accepting. And also listen to Sadhguru too, mention everybody have the good and bad, and it just in the certain environment, it trigger this, you show this, then you actually kind of like you self-content both, everything content both factor, yin and yang. So I start accepting that. I think that I can understand what he was talking about, because I think I had that similar thinking before, but I start to change my thinking, and I start to see how the other thinking makes sense too. Because remember, I read a book a long time ago. It's quite shocking because they're talking about a group of people sitting there doing a pencil rendering a figure. And then somebody draw this, somebody draw that. And then they want to see what they really draw, which is truth. Then they step in and there's nothing. So this is another Western philosophy's idea. So there actually no truth. So which is quite shocking. It's just totally evoked my mind about this believing there's ultimate truth. Maybe there's no ultimate truth. I think I just want to say that's quite interesting, the different thinking method.
Thank you, Jing. Next up is Evanik, followed by Mike. Evanik.
Yeah, I wanted to respond to the hammer that Jacob had. And first of all, I want to say I get what you're saying. But I think if we're talking about the Tao Te Ching and we say that they use words, I don't think the Tao Te Ching is opposed to using words. I think the whole point is that there's so many different words that could describe God or the Tao. So you have the Tao, you have God, you have Allah, you have Jehovah, you have Source, you have Divine Mother, you have gods and goddesses. There's all these different words that are used to describe God, and there's no one word. I think it's what it's trying to say is that there's no one word to describe God. And when you try to say that there is a word that describes God, you're not describing God, because God is everywhere. God is so many different things to so many different people that it's so hard to describe God. And when we try, we're really not doing that. So that's all I wanted to say. And one more thing, I love Jen's theory of the ultimate truth. Like, is there an ultimate truth? I don't know. I don't think there's one way to worship God and all the other ways are going to hell. I don't believe that. I think there's different ways of worshiping God, and I don't think any of them are wrong or right, but I think it is about the internal, and I think that's where we're going. It's all about the internal, what's going on inside you, and I think that's what different religions, in their truest form, try to address.
Thank you, Evanik. Mike, we are running out of time, so I'll give you 1 minute.
30 seconds, and this is more a question than an answer. I believe that what Jacob is saying is that there's a difference that the Bible is divinely inspired. All of the different interpretations were basically written by God through the hands of a scribe. The Tao in particular, I think, is a description of nature and the reality. And if you find something new of reality, it's easy to change. You don't have to go to the original prophets. I think to some extent, the Gita is the same way. And the battle between Arjuna and so forth is not, it recounts history, but it's not quite the same way as being divinely inspired. And that's a stretch on my part. I'm looking for your comment on that.
Thank you.
Maybe I won't get it until after we study that next month.
Thank you, Mike. Yes, you'll have to wait for that. Next up is going to be Kevin. Kevin, go ahead, followed by Jacob. Kevin.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry about this later response. Jacob, thank you. You should before me. I'm going to. He mentioned about how combine the Western, Eastern, Indian, Chinese, or other religion or culture together. That's one example in Chinese. Now, in Chinese, normally we think we have no religion. Actually, if you search wiki Chinese folk religion, you find a lot. And here, the link I post is how the Buddhism, Buddha, Confucius, Lao Tzu taste vinegar. 3 different tastes. Talk about vinegar soup. So that's also, if you look at Chinese temple, one temple, 3 religion. It's Tao, Zhu, and the Zhu is like Confucius, and also Buddhism. So on the same temple. So it's no doubt like this conversation, like how beautiful you guys, the talk. I just listen very carefully, try to be learning. For me, beginning mind always. Thank you so much. Just save time. Yes.
Thank you, Kevin. And that was a great point. I mean, for example, like the structure of thoughts is different. Like, for example, in China, there is the Tao and there is Confucianism. And both those actually interact with one another very intimately. Like China, you can't really understand without both those things together. Excellent point. Next up is Jacob. Jacob, go ahead.
So I surely don't think that any one word can explain God. That's for sure. And I'm not even familiar with that claim. Are there people who think with a single word he could be explained? I mean, I more think that he can be explained with a bunch of words slowly over eternal time. So that's a whole different idea. Well, here's a verse that's just killer to the idea that God can't be explained with words, because the Bible says that the word explains him. Right? I think we just read that, didn't we? That no one has seen God at any time, but well, I'm confusing translations now, but the one who has explained it, and it's a reference to Christ, the Word. So that's saying, not even implicitly, closer to explicitly, that the Word can explain God. So I don't know why there's this idea that it can't. I think because there's a separation between Christ as the Word and the spoken word, we divorce those two somehow, and they're related. Like the act of speech is directly related to Christ himself, because you might regard him as the spokesperson of God. He's speaking for him. And so he's the word. And it's all about speech in some sense. And so when we're speaking down here and we're in the divine form, we're sons, so to speak, as he was. And when we speak, it's that divine faculty of speech, right? And it's that divine faculty of speech, the word, that can explain God. That's the power of speech, that it's so divine that it can explain the divine. So yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I know that's a wonderful point. I mean, I think that's, let me look at like the culture, like for example, Jordan Peterson, right? Jordan Peterson always talks about, speak your truth and the importance of that. And that point is lost in the modern culture. That point is lost because the word is regarded as, oh, everybody speaks things. It's just what you feel like. So it is completely off earth. The idea. So I keep coming back to this. I have it in a very vague form. I don't understand it, but there is something really deep about that idea that it is God and man at the same time. You can use words only like a man, and you can use words in another way where it is actually speaking to God, and it can do both. Words can do both, and there is differences in those things. And so in some ways, the point that you were making, Jacob, that in the modern times that the soul is lost, in the sense that people are focused on the external, they're not focused on the internal. They are being man, but they're not being God at the same time. And it's a very profound thing. I mean, the Bible, I'm just discovering it. So the entire pattern of Jesus being 100% God and 100% man, then teaching his disciples how to be like that by showing them that this is what you need to do, starting by washing their feet and transmitting that knowledge further and then to humanity as such. I mean, it is just incredible. So So, and Jacob, thank you very much for your comments today. I think this is a great conversation. I mean, just like, this is a conversation that you would like to have. This is a conversation that I like to have. And it is wonderful to have so many people who can participate in it and contribute to it in such a deep way, raise questions, because, raising of questions is actually more important, because some people will raise a question and that will spawn this entire discussion. So I want to thank everybody. I was planning to start this thing at 8 o'clock, so I could finish by 10 o'clock, but I have structured it so that I could spend as much time. And this has been just incredible. So I am just loving this series. And I think the fact that so many of you know the Bible so well and have thought so deeply on it, and bring all of this to the table is fantastic. And I expect that the conversations are just going to keep getting richer and richer, because as we develop common context, ways of speaking, as we go through the book, I think meetup after meetup, it's going to be deeper and deeper. So I am just delighted that you're here. Thank you very much. And I will talk to you folks very soon.
Thank
Bye,
you,
everybody.
Shrikant.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Shrikant.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye. Bye.